The clock struck 9:15 p.m. The Hotel Grand Sahel in Ouagadougou gleamed with golden lights, its grand ballroom hosting an opulent banquet that seemed lifted from the pages of a luxury magazine. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across silk tablecloths, while waiters in crisp white uniforms glided between tables bearing trays of champagne and delicacies flown in from Paris that very morning. Diplomats from around the world mingled in clusters, their laughter echoing off the marble walls. French attachés exchanged pleasantries with American envoys. Chinese trade representatives clinked glasses with European Union officials. The air hummed with the sound of practiced diplomacy, that peculiar mixture of genuine warmth and calculated charm that characterized such gatherings. But amid this sea of smiling faces and polite conversation, one man sat in silence. President Ibrahim Traoré's face remained impassive, his dark eyes scanning the room with the careful attention of a chess master studying the board. His military background had taught him to read situations, to sense danger before it materialized. And tonight, every instinct in his body screamed that something was terribly wrong. The silver fork in his hand suddenly froze midway to his mouth. A strange metallic scent, subtle but unmistakable, drifted through the air, cutting through the perfume and cologne that saturated the room. It was the smell of poison, a scent he had learned to recognize during his years in military intelligence training. The odor was faint, almost imperceptible, but to someone trained to detect such things, it might as well have been a klaxon blaring in his ears. Traoré's gaze lifted slowly, deliberately, until it locked onto the European Union representative seated directly across the table. The man appeared completely relaxed, engaged in animated conversation with a German diplomat about agricultural subsidies and development projects. His smile was broad, his gestures expansive. He was the picture of diplomatic ease. But Traoré noticed what others would have missed. The man's cufflinks bore an unusual sheen, catching the light in a way that seemed almost deliberate. They pulsed with a faint luminescence that could have been dismissed as mere reflection, but Traoré recognized it as something else. A signal, perhaps, or a marker for those who knew what to look for. His attention shifted to the glass of water positioned before him. It looked identical to the others on the table at first glance, but subtle differences revealed themselves to his trained eye. This glass was slightly more transparent, as if made from a different quality of crystal. It had been placed just a bit closer to his plate than the others, positioned for easy reach. The condensation on its surface formed in patterns that seemed too perfect, too deliberate. That was all the confirmation he needed. His heart didn't race. Years of military discipline had taught him to control his physiological responses, but his mind shifted into a heightened state of awareness. Tonight, someone intended to erase him from existence. The orchestra in the corner played a waltz, the music floating through the room like a lullaby designed to lull everyone into complacency. But to Traoré, every sound became muffled, as if he were suddenly submerged underwater. Every face around the table transformed from a fellow human being into a potential threat or asset. Every gesture, every glance, every shift in posture became data to be processed and analyzed. He moved his chair back slightly, the motion so subtle that no one appeared to notice. His hand drifted to his pocket, fingers closing around the small tactical knife he always carried, a habit from his days as a soldier that he had never abandoned, despite his advisor's protestations that it was unseemly for a president to go armed to diplomatic functions. The EU representative raised his glass with a flourish that was just a bit too theatrical. His voice dripped with honeyed sweetness as he proposed a toast to new partnerships and mutual prosperity. But beneath the sugar-coated words, Traoré heard the bitter taste of betrayal and colonial ambition that had plagued Africa for centuries. Traoré lifted his own glass in response, matching the gesture but stopping the rim just short of his lips. The movement was so natural, so perfectly executed, that no one suspected he had no intention of drinking. For a single, crystalline moment, his eyes met those of the EU representative. In that instant of locked gazes, something passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement that the game was up, that the masks had slipped just enough for both men to see the truth. The representative's smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Without warning, Traoré's arm swept across the table in a violent arc, sending his glass flying through the air. The crystal goblet tumbled end over end, catching the light from the chandelier before teetering on the marble floor with a sound like a gunshot in the hushed room. The poisoned water spread across the carpet, seeping into the expensive Persian weave, neutralized by its contact with the fabric. The room erupted into chaos. Screams pierced the air as guests jumped to their feet, their chairs scraping against the floor. Whispered conversations turned into frantic shouts. Security personnel materialized from hidden positions around the room, their hands moving to concealed weapons as they tried to assess the threat. Diplomats ducked behind tables or pressed themselves against walls, their diplomatic immunity suddenly feeling like inadequate protection. The orchestra stopped mid-note, the conductor's baton frozen in the air as musicians stared at the commotion. Waiters froze in place, their trays tilting dangerously as they forgot what they were doing. But through all of this pandemonium, Traoré remained perfectly still. He stood like a statue carved from obsidian, his posture straight and unyielding. Every eye in the room gradually turned to him, drawn by the magnetic quality of his absolute calm in the midst of crisis. His gaze swept across the assembled diplomats, politicians, and power brokers, and in his eyes burned a single, unmistakable message. The game is over. The pretense has ended. Tonight, we stop playing by your rules. He moved toward the door with measured steps, his stride neither hurried nor hesitant. He held his head high, shoulders squared, every inch of his bearing radiating the authority of a man who had just survived an assassination attempt and refused to show fear. The crowd parted before him like the Red Sea, no one daring to meet his gaze directly. As he passed through the ornate doorway and into the night, everyone in that ballroom understood with perfect clarity. The mask of diplomatic courtesy had been torn away. Tonight was not about friendship or partnership. Tonight was a declaration of war, a war for sovereignty, for dignity, for the soul of Burkina Faso itself. The message had been sent, and there would be no turning back. At 2:30 a.m., the streets of Ouagadougou lay wrapped in an eerie silence. The usual sounds of the African night, crickets chirping, distant music from late-night clubs, the occasional bark of a dog, had given way to an oppressive quiet that felt almost supernatural. The streetlights cast pale yellow pools on the empty roads, creating islands of illumination in an ocean of darkness. But for President Traoré, this silence was not peaceful. It was the silence of predators waiting in ambush, the silence before the storm breaks. His military-trained ears detected the subtle wrongness in the air, the absence of normal city sounds that indicated something was very wrong. His encrypted phone suddenly blazed to life, screen after screen filling with urgent red alerts. The messages came in rapid succession, each one more alarming than the last. His intelligence network, a web of loyal operatives he had carefully cultivated during his years in the military, was sending him everything they could gather. NATO operatives had moved into position throughout the city. According to the incoming data, 12 surveillance drones had been deployed in the airspace above Ouagadougou, each one equipped with state-of-the-art infrared cameras capable of detecting human heat signatures through walls, roofs, and even dense vegetation. The drones formed a net in the sky, their overlapping coverage areas leaving virtually no blind spots. Ground units had established checkpoints at every major intersection. Armed personnel carriers blocked the main highways leading out of the city. Sniper teams had taken positions on rooftops overlooking key routes. The entire operation had been planned with military precision, designed to trap him like a rat in a maze with no exits. Traoré didn't panic. Panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. Instead, he moved with the cold efficiency that had made him one of the youngest and most effective military strategists in West Africa. He strode quickly to his vehicle, a seemingly ordinary black SUV that appeared modest and unassuming from the outside. But this vehicle was far from ordinary. Beneath its civilian exterior lay some of the most advanced defensive technology available. The body was reinforced with composite armor capable of withstanding small arms fire and even some explosive devices. The windows were multi-layered ballistic glass that could stop a .50 caliber bullet. The engine had been modified for maximum performance, capable of acceleration that would shame many sports cars. Most importantly, the vehicle contained an electronic warfare suite that rivaled those found in military command vehicles. Encrypted communications, signal jamming capabilities, GPS spoofing technology, everything he might need to disappear in a city that was actively hunting him. Traoré slid into the driver's seat and powered up the onboard systems. Multiple screens flicker. Ed to life, displaying a real-time map of Ouagadougou overlaid with the positions of hostile forces. Red dots marked the locations of the drones overhead, their search patterns creating spiraling trails across the digital map. Blue markers indicated the checkpoints and patrol routes. Yellow warnings highlighted high-risk zones where the coverage was most dense. He studied the tactical display with the intensity of a general planning a campaign. Every alley, every side street, every forgotten corner of the city that he had explored during his youth became a potential escape route or hiding place. His fingers danced across the touchscreen, plotting courses, calculating probabilities, identifying the blind spots in the enemy's coverage. The drone network was impressive. He had to admit that. Whoever had planned this operation knew what they were doing. The overlapping sensor coverage meant that traditional evasion tactics would be useless. If he simply tried to drive away, the infrared cameras would pick up his vehicle's heat signature within seconds. If he tried to hide in a building, they would detect his body heat. If he tried to flee on foot, he would be even more vulnerable. But they had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated him. They thought of him as merely a military officer playing at politics, a soldier who had gotten lucky and seized power, but who lacked the sophistication to understand modern electronic warfare. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Traoré started the engine, which purred to life with barely a whisper. The vehicle had been modified with sound-dampening technology that made it nearly silent even at high speeds. He pulled out of his concealed position and headed into the labyrinthine network of narrow streets that characterized the older sections of Ouagadougou. Drones circled overhead like mechanical vultures, their sensors scanning ceaselessly for any sign of their target. But Traoré knew this city in ways that no foreign operator, no matter how well briefed, ever could. He knew which streets ran beneath overhanging roofs that would block thermal imaging. He knew where electrical substations created electromagnetic interference that confused sensors. He knew which routes took him past industrial buildings whose residual heat signatures would mask his own. Every electrical pole became cover. Every marketplace awning became concealment. Every closed shop with its metal security shutters became a shield against the prying eyes above. He navigated the urban terrain the way a fish navigates water, instinctively, effortlessly, reading the environment at a level beyond conscious thought. His fingers flew across the vehicle's integrated keyboard, connecting his encrypted phone to the SUV's more powerful processing systems. He pulled up the city's infrastructure network, power grid, cellular towers, internet backbone, and began looking for vulnerabilities. His military intelligence training had included extensive education in electronic warfare, and he had continued to study and practice those skills even after assuming the presidency. Within minutes, he had identified his target, a cellular signal booster station located 2 blocks from his current position. These stations were designed to amplify mobile phone signals in areas with poor coverage, but they could be manipulated for other purposes by someone who understood their architecture. Traoré launched a carefully crafted intrusion protocol, his fingers dancing across the keyboard with practiced precision. The booster station's security was decent, probably configured by whichever telecommunications company had installed it. But it was designed to keep out amateur hackers and vandals, not someone with his level of training and access to military-grade intrusion tools. The system surrendered its secrets within 40 seconds. Once inside, Traoré deployed a signal manipulation program that would create false echoes and phantom signatures across the drone network's communication channels. It was the electronic equivalent of throwing a smoke bomb. It wouldn't last long, but it would create precious moments of confusion. High above the city, the drone operators suddenly found their screens filling with static and conflicting data. Camera feeds cut out for several seconds before returning with corrupted images. GPS coordinates began showing impossible values. Altitude readings fluctuated wildly. The carefully orchestrated surveillance network descended into chaos as each drone began receiving contradictory commands from what appeared to be multiple control centers. In the NATO control room hastily established in a secure facility on the outskirts of Ouagadougou, panic set in. Operators shouted at each other across the room, trying to make sense of what was happening. Supervisors barked orders that contradicted each other. Technicians frantically worked to restore proper function to the drone network. "Where is he, the operat?" Iron Commander demanded, his American accent thick with frustration. "Someone tell me where the target is." But no one could answer. President Ibrahim Traoré had simply vanished. The SUV came to a stop in a deserted alley behind an abandoned warehouse. Traoré rolled down the window slightly, allowing the cool night air to wash over his face. He took a deep breath, feeling his heart rate slowly returning to normal. The immediate danger had passed, at least for the moment. But this was far from over. He could not simply hide. That would be a temporary solution at best. He needed to turn the tables completely, to transform from hunted to hunter. And for that, he needed to be more than just invisible. He needed to be everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. His fingers returned to the keyboard. This time, he accessed a different set of systems. The city's traffic camera network, public Wi-Fi hotspots, even the GPS systems in taxis and delivery vehicles. He began generating false location signals, spoofed cellular data that would indicate his presence at multiple points across the city simultaneously. The NATO operators, still struggling to restore their drone network to full functionality, suddenly found their systems reporting that Traoré's phone signal was appearing at a dozen different locations across Ouagadougou. Each signal looked authentic. Each one generated the appropriate electronic signatures and metadata. It was impossible to tell which, if any, was real. 15 police vehicles roared out from their staging areas, sirens wailing as they raced toward the various reported positions. But each team found only empty streets, confused civilians, or sometimes nothing at all. They were chasing ghosts, phantoms created by a master of electronic warfare who was dancing circles around their supposedly superior technology. Traoré allowed himself a slight smile as he monitored the chaos he had created. He deleted sensitive data from his devices, purged communication logs that might reveal his contacts and plans, and reconfigured his systems to create new false trails. He set the drones chasing each other, spoofing their identification codes so that they began treating each other as targets to be tracked. At 3:12 a.m., as the first hints of pre-dawn gray began to lighten the eastern horizon, a silent victory was recorded in the skies above Ouagadougou. The drones still flew their patterns, their engines humming in the darkness. But they saw nothing. They tracked nothing. On NATO's tactical displays, only empty streets appeared, mocking their efforts with vacant pixels. And somewhere in those empty streets, invisible to satellites and sensors alike, President Ibrahim Traoré's SUV slipped through the darkness like a shadow fleeing the dawn. The city slept, unaware of the deadly game being played in its streets. But one man remained awake, vigilant, protecting his nation with nothing more than his wits, his training, and his unshakable determination to remain free. The hunters had become the hunted, and they didn't even realize it yet. At approximately 4:33 a.m., along the Koudougou-Bobo-Dioulasso highway, the ground began to tremble with a low, ominous rumble that grew steadily louder. The sound was felt before it was heard, a vibration that started in the earth itself and worked its way up through the soles of feet, through bones, into the chest cavity, where it made hearts beat faster with primal recognition of approaching danger. 16 armored vehicles thundered down the highway in a tight formation, moving at a speed that seemed reckless for such massive machines. Each vehicle was a fortress on wheels, hardened steel plating, bulletproof glass, run-flat tires designed to keep moving even after taking gunfire. These were not the aging Soviet-era equipment that many African militaries made do with. These were modern, state-of-the-art military vehicles that cost more than most Burkinabe citizens would earn in 10 lifetimes. The engines roared like wounded beasts, their sound echoing off the surrounding hills and sending flocks of birds bursting from trees in panic. The vibration of their passage shook leaves from branches and sent small animals scurrying for cover. This was not a convoy trying to move subtly or avoid detection. This was a show of force, a demonstration of overwhelming military might designed to intimidate anyone who might consider resistance. Inside the vehicles, masked soldiers sat in tense silence. Their faces were covered with tactical balaclavas that left only their eyes visible, and those eyes held a hardness that spoke of extensive training and battlefield experience. These were not local recruits or poorly trained militia members. These were professional soldiers, likely contractors or special forces operatives from Western militaries, sent to accomplish a mission that official government forces could not be openly associated with. Their equipment reflected their professional status, each soldier ride weapons that cost more than a teacher's annual salary, assault rifles with advanced optics, sidearms with custom grips, tactical vests laden with magazines and equipment. Their communications gear was top of the line, allowing them to coordinate their actions with split-second precision. They were the epitome of modern military power, seemingly invincible. But they were driving into a trap, and they had no idea. High above, invisible against the pre-dawn darkness, Traoré's counter-surveillance drone circled silently. This was not one of the noisy, easily detected drones that hobbyists flew. This was military-grade equipment, modified with stealth features that made it nearly impossible to detect with conventional sensors. Its camera fed a crystal-clear image directly to Traoré's position, showing every detail of the approaching convoy. President Traoré stood atop a rocky outcropping that overlooked a crucial curve in the highway. The position gave him a commanding view of the road below while keeping him concealed from casual observation. He wore a black tactical jacket that helped him blend with the shadows, and in his hand, he held a military-grade communication device that kept him connected to his dispersed teams. His eyes, barely visible in the darkness, showed no fear. Instead, they held the calm determination of a chess master who had anticipated every move his opponent might make and prepared counters for each one. He had been planning for this moment since he first learned of the conspiracy against him, and now all the pieces were falling into place exactly as he had foreseen. He raised the communication device to his lips and spoke in a low, controlled voice that nevertheless carried absolute authority. "All units, take your positions. No one fires until I give the order. We win this without bloodshed, or we don't win at all." Responses came back in quick succession, acknowledgments from teams positioned at carefully chosen points all along this stretch of highway. Traoré had learned long ago that the most effective tactics were often the simplest. Complex operations created more opportunities for things to go wrong. Simple, well-executed plans succeeded where elaborate schemes failed. The lead vehicle in the convoy rounded the curve at high speed, its driver confident in the road ahead. That confidence lasted exactly 2 seconds. Spike strips, modern military variants far more effective than the simple versions police used, had been deployed across the road surface just beyond the curve, positioned where the driver would have no time to react after spotting them. The moment the lead vehicle's tires contacted the strips, hundreds of hollow spikes punctured the rubber, each one designed to embed itself and create maximum deflation. There was no dramatic explosion, no spectacular crash. Instead, the vehicle simply lost control as all 4 tires simultaneously failed. The driver fought with the wheel, his training and reflexes helping him maintain some control, but physics could not be denied. The multi-ton vehicle began to skid, its momentum carrying it sideways across the road. The second vehicle in the convoy had no time to react. Its driver saw the lead vehicle beginning to lose control and instinctively hit the brakes, but the convoy had been moving too fast and following too close. The second vehicle slammed into the first with a sound like thunder, metal crumpling, and glass shattering. The third vehicle swerved to avoid the collision, its driver showing excellent reflexes and skill. For a moment, it seemed he might succeed in navigating around the wreckage. But then his tires, too, hit the spike strips and he lost control. The vehicle careened off the road and came to rest at an angle, partially blocking the highway. In 15 seconds, the entire convoy had become a tangled mess of disabled vehicles. Some had collided with others. Some had run off the road trying to avoid collisions. A few had managed to stop in controlled fashion, but they were blocked in by the vehicles ahead and behind them. The precise military formation had dissolved into chaos, and not a single shot had been fired. Traoré's voice came through the communication devices of his soldiers, calm and measured. "Now, move into position but keep weapons lowered. Show them we're in control, but we're not looking for a massacre." From the bushes and rocky outcroppings lining both sides of the highway, Traoré's soldiers emerged. They moved with professional discipline, their rifles held in low, ready positions, not aimed directly at the convoy, but able to be brought to bear in an instant if necessary. Their body language communicated both capability and restraint, a difficult balance that only well-trained soldiers could maintain. The soldiers from the convoy began emerging from their vehicles, some climbing out through doors while others scrambled through hatches in the roofs. Their weapons were drawn, and confusion clouded their faces behind their masks. They had been told this would be a simple operation: drive to a position, establish security, wait for the target to be delivered to them. No one had briefed them on the possibility of running into an organized ambush. One of the convoy's officers, identifiable by slightly different gear and the command radio he carried, stumbled forward with his wireless device clutched in one hand. His voice was high with stress as he shouted into the darkness. "Who is this? Identify yourselves. We are NATO security forces operating under international authority." For a moment there was only silence. Then, from speakers positioned around the ambush site, Traoré's voice resonated, amplified and echoing off the surrounding terrain. "There is no NATO here. There is only truth. Put down your weapons. You are surrounded, outmaneuvered, and outthought. You can leave here alive and embarrassed, or you can make this ugly. Choose now." Some of the soldiers began to lower their weapons, clearly recognizing the tactical reality of their situation. But one, either braver or more foolish than the rest, reached for a concealed device on his vest. His hand moved with the quick, practiced motion of someone activating a trigger or sending a signal. Traoré's electronic warfare systems, still active and monitoring all frequencies, detected the signal immediately. Analysis took less than a second. It was an activation code for a series of charges hidden throughout the convoy. Apparently, the plan had been to destroy the vehicles and any evidence they contained if the operation was compromised. From his command position, Traoré's fingers flew across his tactical interface. The signal was intercepted, duplicated, modified, and sent back to its source, but with crucial parameters changed. Instead of triggering the charges, the modified signal locked them down, rendering them inert. The soldier who had triggered the signal waited for the explosion that would erase all evidence. Instead, there was nothing. His face went pale as he realized his failsafe had been turned against him. "Weapons down," Traoré's voice commanded again. "Last chance, my patience has limits." This time there was no hesitation. Rifle after rifle clattered to the pavement. Sidearms followed. The soldiers raised their hands in surrender, the universal gesture of defeat that transcended language and nationality. Traoré descended from his observation point, moving with the calm, measured pace of someone who knew the battle was already won. His gait carried the dignity and authority that came only to those who had truly earned their position through merit and struggle. He walked between the disabled vehicles, his soldiers maintaining security positions around him, but not interfering as he approached the surrendered convoy. He bent down and picked up a folder that had spilled from one of the vehicles during the collision. Its contents spilled partially out: documents with corporate logos, financial records, communications between military contractors and resource extraction companies. Each page told part of a story about who was funding this operation and what they hoped to gain from it. Above, Traoré's drones, multiple units, not just the single surveillance platform, recorded everything. Every face, every license plate, every piece of equipment, every document. This evidence would be priceless in the court of international opinion. At exactly 5:00 a.m., as the sun began to paint the eastern sky with streaks of orange and gold, the smoke and dust from the disabled convoy began to settle. The highway looked like a battlefield, but remarkably, not a single drop of blood had been spilled. It was a victory, but one achieved through superior planning and technology rather than superior violence. Traoré's voice rang out across the scene, addressing both his own soldiers and the captured foreign operatives. "We do not kill our enemies. We bury their plans, we expose their schemes. We show the world what they tried to hide. That is how a nation truly protects itself, not through violence but through truth." The captured soldiers, many of whom had fought in conflicts across the Middle East and Africa, had never experienced anything quite like this. They had been outmaneuvered at every turn by an opponent they had been told was unsophisticated and unprepared. It was a lesson in humility they would not soon forget. As his forces began the process of documenting and securing the scene, President Ibrahim Traoré allowed himself a moment to look out at the rising sun. Another night had passed. Another threat had been neutralized. But he knew this was far from over. The powers that had sent this convoy would not give up so easily. The war for Burkina Faso's sovereignty was just beginning. The clock showed 11:18 p.m., but inside the International Trade Center, time seemed to move at a different pace. The building's gleaming glass facade reflected the city lights below, creating an illusion of transparency that was deeply ironic given what transpired within its walls. The modern architecture, all clean lines and open spaces, had been designed to project an image of international cooperation and progressive partnership. Tonight, President Ibrahim Traoré would strip away that facade and expose the corruption festering beneath. The service entrance on the building's east side had been left unlocked by a cleaning staff member, a woman whose brother had been killed in a mining accident caused by faulty equipment provided by a foreign contractor who had bribed officials to bypass safety inspections. She had been waiting for years for someone to hold these corporations accountable. When Traoré's people approached her, she didn't hesitate. Traoré moved through the building with practiced stealth, his two elite intelligence operatives flanking him. These weren't ordinary security personnel. Both had backgrounds in military intelligence, with additional training in cyber operations and forensic data recovery. One carried a specialized kit of electronic devices. The other had equipment for documenting and copying physical evidence. They moved like ghosts through the building, avoiding security cameras whose patrol patterns they had studied for weeks. The executive floor was eerily quiet. Most legitimate business had concluded hours ago, but in one corner conference room, lights still glowed. Through the frosted glass, a single silhouette could be seen hunched over a laptop, fingers moving with urgent speed across the keyboard. Inside that room, Chen Wei, a trade consultant, officially employed by the China-Africa Development Initiative, was working to complete a transfer of sensitive documentation before his scheduled departure from Burkina Faso the following morning. The files on his screen represented 2 years of carefully orchestrated deals, contracts that promised infrastructure development but delivered debt traps, agreements that spoke of partnership but created dependency, arrangements that transferred billions in resources for pennies on the dollar. Chen had done this same work in 7 other African nations. The formula was always the same: identify corruptible officials, offer them personal enrichment in exchange for favorable terms, structure deals so complex that their true cost wouldn't be apparent for years, then move on before the consequences materialized. It was economic colonialism with a modern face, and Chen was very good at his job. He was so focused on his work that he didn't hear the door open. "Working late, Mr. Chen." The voice cut through the silence like a blade. Chen spun in his chair so quickly he nearly fell, his hand instinctively reaching for the laptop's power button. But he froze when he saw who had entered. President Ibrahim Traoré stood in the doorway, his presence commanding despite his lack of security detail or official trappings. Behind him, 2 operatives moved into the room with professional efficiency, one immediately moving to secure the door while the other began unpacking equipment. Mr. President," Chen stammered, his mind racing to find an explanation, a cover story, anything. This is a private business meeting. You can't just..." "Can't I?" Traoré's voice remained calm, almost conversational, which made it somehow more threatening than if he had shouted. He moved closer, his eyes never leaving Chen's face. "This is my country, Mr. Chen. Every room, every building, every square meter of soil. And I most certainly can go wherever corruption against my people is being perpetrated." Traoré's gaze shifted to the laptop screen, where columns of numbers and legal text in multiple languages were visible. His expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. 34 contracts. I count 34 separate agreements on your screen right now. Would you like to explain to me what they contain?" Chen's face had gone pale, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead, despite the air-conditioned coolness of the room. His hand still hovered near the laptop, fingers twitching with the urge to delete everything, to activate the security protocols that would wipe the hard drive clean within seconds. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Traoré said softly, reading the intention in Chen's body language. "You see, you're operating under a fundamental misunderstanding. You think that if you delete those files, the evidence disappears. But I've been monitoring your activities for 3 weeks. Every keystroke, every file transfer, every encrypted message you thought was secure. We've already copied everything." He moved around the desk so he was standing directly behind Chen, able to see the screen clearly. His operative had connected a device to the room's network port and was already beginning the process of extracting data not just from Chen's laptop, but from the entire corporate server that the trade center hosted. "Let me tell you what I..." "See here," Traoré continued, pointing at the screen. "Contract number 1, lithium mining rights in the eastern provinces. Your company promises to invest $50 million in infrastructure. In exchange, you receive exclusive extraction rights for 30 years and pay royalties of just 3%. 3%, Mr. Chen, for resources worth billions." He scrolled down, his finger moving across the touchpad with surprising gentleness given the anger that was surely building inside him. Contract number 7, Agricultural Development Partnership. You provide tractors and equipment, manufactured in China, of course, and in exchange, you receive rights to export 90% of the harvest. The same harvest grown on land owned by Burkinabe farmers for generations, who now become little more than laborers on their own soil. Chen found his voice, though it came out weak and defensive. These are legitimate business arrangements. Everything is legal, approved by your own government officials. Approved by officials who received payments from your organization, Traoré interrupted, his voice hardening. Officials whose bank accounts in Dubai and Switzerland suddenly became much heavier after signing these legitimate agreements. Officials who are, even as we speak, being removed from their positions and facing prosecution. The operative who had been working on data extraction looked up and nodded. We have everything, sir. All server contents have been copied. Email archives, file metadata, even deleted documents recovered from backup systems. Traoré returned his attention to Chen. You want to know what makes this particularly offensive, Mr. Chen? It's not just the theft, though stealing from poor nations is contemptible enough. It's the pretense. You call it partnership, you call it development. You speak of South-South cooperation and mutual benefit. But these contracts, he gestured at the screen with barely contained anger. These are colonialism with a modern face. The chains are made of debt instead of iron, but they bind just as surely. Chen's fear was giving way to a kind of desperate anger. You think you can fight this? You think you can just reject these agreements? There are consequences for nations that don't honor their commitments. Your credit rating will be destroyed. Investment will dry up. Your economy will collapse. For the first time, Traoré smiled, though there was no warmth in it. Is that a threat, Mr. Chen? Because let me explain something to you about threats. A threat only works when the person being threatened values what you're threatening to take away. You threaten our credit rating, we'll build our economy without borrowed money. You threat to withdraw investment, we'll develop our resources ourselves, even if it takes longer. You threaten isolation, we'll find partners who actually believe in fair trade. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper but losing none of its intensity. Here's what you don't understand. We've been poor before. We've survived without your investments before. What we cannot survive is selling our children's future for the illusion of prosperity today. What we cannot accept is becoming economically colonized after fighting so hard to become politically free. The second operative had begun photographing documents, creating a comprehensive record of everything in the room. The laptop, papers scattered across the conference table, even the leather portfolio that Chen had placed on a nearby chair. These contracts, Traoré said, picking up a printed document from the table, they all follow the same pattern. Complex legal language designed to obscure the true terms. Arbitration clauses that ensure any disputes are settled in foreign courts under foreign law. Provisions that allow the contracts to be transferred to other corporations without our consent. It's brilliant, really, in a sociopathic kind of way. He dropped the document back on the table. But here's what's going to happen now. Tomorrow morning, I'm holding a press conference. Every one of these contracts will be made public. Every clause, every term, every hidden provision. The international media will see exactly what development partnerships really mean. And the people of Africa, not just Burkina Faso, but across the entire continent, will see what's been done to them in the name of progress. Chen's expression had shifted from fear to calculation. You release those documents, and you'll make enemies of some of the most powerful interests in the world. China will retaliate. Trade relationships will be severed. You're signing your own death warrant. Perhaps, Traoré acknowledged, but I'd rather die free than live as an accomplice to the enslavement of my people. And make no mistake, Mr. Chen, that's what these contracts represent. Economic enslavement dressed up in the language of partnership and development. The data extraction was complete. The documents were photographed. The evidence was secured. Traoré's team had what they came for. As they prepared to leave, Traoré placed his hand on Chen's shoulder, not roughly, but firmly enough to ensure the man couldn't mistake the gesture's significance. You can return to Beijing, Mr. Chen. Tell your superiors what happened here tonight. Tell them that Africa is waking up. Tell them that the era of exploitation disguised as aid is ending. And tell them that if they want real partnerships in the future, they'll need to offer real terms, terms that recognize us as equals, not as resources to be extracted. He turned toward the door, then paused and looked back one final time. One more thing, those security protocols you wanted to activate, the ones that would have wiped your hard drive, we disabled them 3 days ago. You've been operating on a compromised system this entire time, never realizing that every document you created, every message you sent was being copied to our servers. You came to Africa thinking you were the hunter, but you were the prey all along. The door closed behind them with a soft click, leaving Chen alone in the conference room, staring at his laptop screen with the dawning realization that everything had changed. The comfortable world of unchallenged economic exploitation had just encountered a force it wasn't prepared for, a leader who couldn't be bought, intimidated, or convinced to look the other way. Outside, as they moved through the darkened building toward the exit, one of Traoré's operatives spoke quietly. "Sir, he was right about one thing. This will create powerful enemies." Traoré nodded without breaking stride. "We already had those enemies. The only difference is that now they'll stop pretending to be friends, and that, my friend, is a kind of progress." The morning of the public rally dawned bright and clear, the kind of day that seemed to promise hope and new beginnings. By 6:12 a.m., Ouagadougou's central square was already filling with people. They came from every corner of the city, from rural villages hours away, from neighboring towns. They came because word had spread that President Traoré would speak, and that when he spoke, truth followed. Flags waved in the gentle breeze, the red, green, and yellow of Burkina Faso, each color representing the revolution, hope, and the nation's mineral wealth. Vendors moved through the crowd selling water and food. Children sat on their parents' shoulders, waving small flags. The atmosphere was festive, celebratory, electric with the feeling that history was being made. But on the rooftops surrounding the square, a different kind of preparation was underway. 5 men, professionals hired through a complex chain of intermediaries that ensured no connection could be traced back to their true employers, had taken positions on different buildings. Each had arrived separately, using false credentials and cover stories. Each carried a high-powered rifle broken down and concealed in nondescript cases that had been labeled as surveying equipment or photographer's gear. These were not amateurs. Each had military backgrounds, former special forces operatives from various Western nations who had transitioned into the lucrative world of private military contracting. Each had killed before, most recently in Syria or Yemen or other conflicts, where the rules of engagement were flexible and questions were rarely asked. For them, this was just another job, another target, another payday. The lead sniper, call sign Echo 1, communicated with his team through an encrypted radio network. His position on the roof of the bank's central building gave him a clear sightline to the podium where Traoré would speak. Range, 342 meters. Wind, minimal, left to right at approximately 5 kilometers per hour. Temperature, rising, which would affect bullet trajectory but not significantly at this range. All factors within acceptable parameters. Echo 2 status, he murmured into his throat mic. Position secure, line of sight confirmed, ready to engage. One by one, the other snipers reported in. 5 different angles, 5 different firing positions, all converging on the same target. The plan was simple, synchronized shots from multiple directions, ensuring that even if one missed, another would hit. It was overkill, really, but their employers had been explicit that this target must not survive. What none of them knew was that from the moment they had entered Ouagadougou 3 days earlier, they had been watched. On the stage, President Traoré stood before a microphone, looking out at the sea of faces. He appeared calm, even relaxed, waving to the crowd and smiling. But in his ear, barely visible, a sophisticated communications device fed him constant updates from his intelligence team. "Sir, Rooftop 4 confirmed movement. Subject has weapon deployed. Rooftop 6, subject at firing position, finger near trigger. Rooftop 2, additional subject spotted, Cown. Now 5 total hostiles." Traoré's expression didn't change. Years of military training had taught him to control not just his actions but his reactions. Show nothing. Give the enemy no indication that you know what they're planning. His smile remained fixed, his wave continued, but his mind was racing through tactical options. Behind the scenes, his security team was already in motion. These weren't conventional bodyguards. They were counter-sniper specialists, trained in the same elite schools that had produced many of the men now targeting their president. They had studied every building around the square, identified every possible firing position, and prepared countermeasures for each one. "Deploy countermeasure Alpha," Traoré whispered, his lips barely moving. To the crowd, it looked like he was saying a prayer or perhaps humming along to the national anthem that was playing over the speakers. High above the square, invisible to the naked eye, Traoré's counter-surveillance drones began releasing specialized payloads. These weren't weapons in the conventional sense. Instead, they deployed what intelligence specialists called false heat signatures, sophisticated decoys that emitted infrared radiation matching human body heat. To the thermal imaging scopes that several of the snipers were using, it suddenly appeared as though multiple versions of Traoré were moving around the stage. Echo 1, peering through his scope, suddenly swore under his breath. His targeting reticle had been centered on Traoré's chest, the crosshairs steady, his breathing controlled, his finger applying the first pressure to the trigger. But now his view was obscured by what appeared to be 3 or 4 heat signatures all overlapping, making it impossible to distinguish the real target from the decoys. Echo 1 to all units, we have thermal interference, switching to optical targeting. But switching to optical wasn't much better. Other drones had moved into position, carrying powerful LED arrays that could emit precisely targeted beams of light. As Echo 1's eye returned to his optical scope, a brilliant flash of white light suddenly filled his vision, destroying his night-adapted eyesight and making it impossible to see clearly. "I'm compromised," he hissed into the radio. "I'm compromised, repositioning." Similar reports came from the other snipers. Echo 2 found his laser rangefinder suddenly giving impossible readings, distances that fluctuated wildly, making accurate shooting impossible. Echo 3 discovered that his rifle's electronic firing system, which used a small computer to calculate the perfect trigger release point, had been hacked and was now locked. On the stage, Traoré began his speech. His voice boomed across the square, amplified by speakers, but also carrying that natural authority that made people lean forward to listen. "My brothers and sisters," he began, "today marks not just a celebration, but a reckoning. There are those, even now, even at this moment, who believe they can silence truth with violence, who believe that by eliminating one voice, they can preserve their systems of exploitation and control." The crowd roared its approval, but Traoré's security team was moving silently through the buildings surrounding the square. Team Alpha had reached Rooftop 1. They moved with practiced efficiency, door breached, flashbang deployed, target secured. The sniper barely had time to register what was happening before he was face down on the roof, zip-tied and disarmed. "Target 1 neutralized, sir," came the report through Traoré's earpiece. He continued speaking, his words flowing smoothly without any indication of the drama unfolding around him. "But here is what these people do not understand. You cannot kill an idea with a bullet. You cannot assassinate justice. You cannot murder truth." Team Bravo reported in. Target 2 secured, weapon disabled, subject in custody. Echo 3, the most experienced of the snipers, realized what was happening. His team wasn't just being countered, they were being hunted. He abandoned his firing position and made for the roof access door, planning to blend into the building and escape. But the door burst open before he reached it, and he found himself staring at 3 Burkina Bay Special Forces operators. His hand went to his sidearm, but he never cleared leather. A taser hit him in the chest, 50,000 volts of electricity turning his muscles to jelly. He collapsed, conscious but unable to move. Target 3 secured. Echo 4 made a desperate decision. If he couldn't kill the target from distance, he'd get closer. He disassembled his rifle with practiced speed, threw it into his equipment bag, and headed for the stairs. Maybe he could get to street level, blend into the crowd, find a closer position. He made it down 3 flights before a door opened in front of him, and he found his path blocked by a woman in civilian clothes. She looked like an office worker, perhaps a secretary or administrative assistant. He started to push past her, not seeing her as a threat. That was his mistake. She was one of Traoré's intelligence operatives, trained in close-quarters combat. Her hand shot out, striking him in the throat with precisely calculated force, enough to stun and disable, not enough to cause permanent damage. As he gasped for air, she swept his legs and had him on the ground before he could process what was happening. Target 4 secured. Echo 1, the team leader, was making his escape across the rooftops. He was angry, humiliated, and increasingly desperate. This operation had turned into a disaster, and he needed to get out of the country before he ended up in a Burkina Bay prison. He leaped from one roof to another, his military training keeping him agile despite the equipment he carried. But Traoré's team had anticipated this move as well. A drone moved into position, tracking Echo One's movement across the rooftops. As he prepared to make another jump, the drone released a specialized net, not large enough to entangle him completely, but sufficient to foul his legs mid-jump. He landed badly on the next roof, his ankle turning with a crack that he felt more than heard. Pain shot up his leg, and when he tried to stand, the ankle wouldn't bear his weight. He was finished. Target 5 secured. All hostiles in custody, sir. By the time Traoré's security forces dragged Echo One to his feet and began moving him toward custody, the president was concluding his speech. His words rang across the square, taking on additional meaning for those who knew what had just transpired. They sent their best against us today. Their technology, their training, their resources. And where are they now? Defeated not by superior violence, but by superior will. Beaten not by bigger weapons, but by bigger purpose. This is how a nation protects itself, not through fear, but through vigilance, not through oppression, but through unity. The crowd erupted in thunderous applause, unaware that they had just witnessed a failed assassination attempt. Unaware that while they celebrated, 5 foreign operatives had been captured and neutralized without a single shot being fired, without a single drop of blood being spilled, without a single moment of panic among the civilians. As Traoré descended from the stage, surrounded now by visible security, he allowed himself a small moment of satisfaction. The message had been sent, loud and clear. Burkina Faso would not be intimidated. Its leader could not be eliminated so easily. And those who tried would find themselves not just defeated, but exposed. In a secure facility on the edge of Ouagadougou, the 5 captured snipers were being processed. Their faces were photographed, their fingerprints taken, their equipment catalogued. Each piece of evidence would be used not just in their prosecution, but in building a case against the organizations that had hired them. And through it all, President Ibrahim Traoré had never stopped smiling, never shown fear, never given his enemies the satisfaction of seeing him flinch. Because he understood something they didn't. Leadership isn't about being invulnerable. It's about being unbreakable. At 10:00 p.m., Ouagadougou rested in an unusual peace. The city that had been a battlefield of wits and wills now breathed with the calm of a storm past. Street lights illuminated empty avenues. Birds had returned to their nests, and in the air lingered that peculiar silence that follows great upheavals. On the presidential palace balcony, one man remained awake. President Ibrahim Traoré stood gazing out at his city, his nation, transformed not by violence but by courage and truth. His advisor approached quietly. "Sir, you've changed history today. You must be exhausted. Please rest." Traoré smiled faintly. Rest is a luxury for nations whose dreams are already fulfilled. For those of us still building those dreams, sleep is a privilege we must earn each day anew. He thought of the poisoned glass, the drone hunt, the convoy ambush, the exposures and confrontations. Each moment had been a test, and each test had revealed a simple truth. Sovereignty cannot be granted by others. It must be claimed and defended by those willing to sacrifice everything for it. As dawn approached, President Ibrahim Traoré remained standing, vigilant and unbreakable. The message was clear to anyone watching. Africa's time of being controlled from abroad was ending. A new era was beginning, written not in foreign capitals but in the hearts of free African people. And this president would ensure that future generations inherited not debt and dependency, but dignity and self-determination. The night ended. A new day began. And history recorded that when the world tried to break one man's will, they discovered instead that the human spirit, when fighting for justice, is truly unbreakable.